Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Brennan O'Brien and Tim Road from The Straight, brought to you by our sponsors, Inglis and NZB. Today, events in the racing sphere take centre stage as the ATC Stouts with Racing New South Wales resumes off the back of the club announcing a $2.6 million deficit. A new reform group calls for change in New South Wales, and Peter V'landys under the spotlight. We'll whip around the country and look at the state of play in WA, Tasmania and Victoria. In wagering, Entain pulls out the slasher. PointsBet looks to capture the social betting market. And what is costing the Australian racing industry $135 million a year? You'll have to listen on and find out. Finally, in breeding and bloodstock, Shane Dye on buying 2-year-olds. John Jess remembered, and catalogues galore released. Tim, welcome. And while the on-track action may be cooling down somewhat, albeit WA still firing along there, and there's still some good races coming up over there, the news off the track has been a frantic pace this week, especially yesterday. We had a very busy day yesterday. Let's first of all have a look at the ATC situation and talk about what's going on in the Australian Turf Club. We sort of got an idea yesterday that this show cause stuff, which we'll probably put on pause during this main part of the Spring Carnival, the discussions around the ATC and Racing New South Wales will resume next week.
Yeah, so I think the ATC are paying, so they're meeting with Racing, so they're not fronting a hearing, so to speak. So next Thursday there'll be a meeting between the 4 directors of the ATC at least, and Racing New South Wales board, and presumably some executives, and probably Peter V'landys, to discuss what the next steps are. I think the ATC actually want to find out, okay, what do you want Racing New South Wales? Yes, you've got concerns. What do you want us to do? What, Tim Hale, the chair, and so forth, have set out to try and debunk a lot of these concerns and say, no, we're in a reasonably strong financial position. Obviously, the annual report was released yesterday, but they've said publicly that the spring's been very good to them in the lead up to the Everest and cash flow. And obviously, as we discussed previously, Everest Day seemed very successful, and obviously King Rising with World Pool would have bumped their coffers up significantly. So there won't be a resolution next week, I don't think. It's just where to next, and trying to nut out what Racing New South Wales actually want and what ATC can do about it, and hopefully stay, for their sake and the members' sake, stave off being put into administration.
Yeah. And I think all this stems out of the Rosehill stuff, Tim, which has obviously been a big issue over the last couple of years. The ATC reported yesterday an annual report, $2.59 million deficit in its annual report. The report revealed that while the ATC's revenue jumped to a historic high of $373.9 million, expenses of the business had also risen to $376.5 million. What wasn't set out specifically clear in those expenses, and that's up to the ATC how they do this, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, but we still don't have any clear idea about what the Rosehill stuff actually cost the ATC. We know that they've never sort of admitted in the annual report that it was a significant distraction for them. Now, they probably felt like they had to go through the process, but certainly for 18 months, the ATC was consumed by this. It obviously then cost Peter McGorrin stepped down. There was significant shake up throughout the organisation. The CEO stepped down or resigned in September, I think it was this year. So there's been a lot going on. Steve McMahon's now the CEO, Tim Hale's now the chairman, as you say. There's a lot sort of playing out here across the board. It'd be interesting to see what the numbers look like this year, and obviously we don't get a really clear view of that because, there was probably a sense of clearing that Rosehill hurdle and moving on to what the next things is. But the challenge still remains there, and Tim Hale points out in the annual report that the commercialisation of the land around Canterbury and the commercialisation of the land around Rosehill, the Camellia precinct, is a priority for them as well. So it's interesting how sort of this is sort of played out to you, maybe. Yeah, and I think perhaps this is part of the discussions. I'm assuming that, maybe I'm making a false assumption here, but the conversations will be in a rational terms and working these things out. It also comes in the context that yesterday, also on Thursday, it was announced that a racing reform group had been formed in New South Wales to basically lobby for changes within the racing industry, but specifically around the hazard review, Tim. Now, the hazard review is obviously looking at the way that the New South Wales racing industry is structured, and whether the Thoroughbred Racing Act, which governs racing in New South Wales, and the ATC, broadly the New South Wales racing industry, whether it needs a review or not. You spoke to Jason Abrahams, who's one of the members of that group yesterday. What was your sort of view about sort of what they want to achieve, both short term but also longer term?
Well, they want to highlight, obviously we've followed this story in Rosehill from the get-go, but their view is there's still a lot of industry people that are probably a little bit oblivious to the review and the importance of it. And as Jason said, it's about setting out, the Thoroughbred Racing Act has been in place since 1996. A lot's changed in nearly 20 years. It's about setting out for the next 20 and what that looks like with funding. And so they want to try and push the government either to include in the current review or have another review or something to at least look at it in the future about the governance structure of Racing New South Wales and its relationship with the government and particularly funding, as we know, with corporate bookmaker revenue going directly to Racing New South Wales as opposed to the clubs. It's changed the power balance, and they want to explore that, or at least Hazard or someone at the government to look at that. And so they're campaigning for that. Whether they've left their run too late, time will tell, but there are certainly some heavy hitters on there with, as you said, Jason Abrahams, Julia Ritchie's sort of well-known industry figure, breeder, owner, been on the ATC board or AJC. Brian Nutt's quite vocal and passionate about the industry. These are passionate industry people who got their own money invested heavily. So they want to see it's about, they say, for the betterment of the industry going forward.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I guess, in a situation where everybody's sort of on the same page, you sit there and go, hey, the common good will be reached on this. But it's clearly that there's a lot of personality involved in this team. There's a lot of things going on, and in the background, you talked about the ATC before, we've got, to be fair to be honest, a frankly bizarre situation where Mark Latham's now been, providing affidavits. The independent MP has been a massive critic of Racing New South Wales and the ATC, to be fair, but mainly Racing New South Wales, is now providing affidavits to Racing New South Wales in order to show that Tim Hale, or try to prove that Tim Hale may have broken the ATC's code of conduct. If that were to happen, and, I'm not saying it has happened, to want to state that, but if that were to be proved, if Racing New South Wales were to be found that, and Tim Hale was to be forced to step down with the ATC board, to leave them as 3 board members without a quorum and, effectively into administration. So in what world do we have Mark Latham and Peter V'landys on the same side of this argument, Tim? Like, this is how bizarre this has got in my situation. And in the context of that, we've got broader things going on. Obviously, Peter V'landys had a very busy last couple of months. But his blow up with the Trainers Association, again, a surprising development given the strength of his relationship previously with Richard Pegan, who's the chairman there. You covered that story off this week. I guess it's more about the fact that the information got back to Peter V'landys from the testimony after the Hazard review that probably casts a different shadow on this as well.
Yeah, it's just interesting, obviously. So the chairman of the New South Wales Trainers Association, Richard Pegan, Richard Callender, the CEO, and Brett Kavanagh, are a high-profile country trainer, I guess, trained a lot of winners, champion country trainer in the past, fronted the Hazard review or were asked questions and their views, and obviously it's confidential, but things do leak. And just to me, what's fascinating is some of the contents of that meeting. I don't know who the source was, got back to Peter very quickly and obviously agitated him. So we're told, and what I've been told too from sources, that he did get a grilling, and it's probably, I think even Peter's biggest critics will admit he's done a lot of good things for racing in New South Wales as well, but he's been there nearly 21 years. So I think that was part of the argument. What I've told is, maybe it's time for change or the board to oversee that. And he didn't take that well, because apparently, and there was a text message he exchanged perhaps with Richard Pegan, and whether that's fractured the relationship, because interestingly, Richard's on the board of the new rugby league PNG team as well. So there's a lot of crossover there. And whether they can repair that would be fascinating to see. And I know in discussions I've had with industry people, they're frustrated that Racing New South Wales is able to make some big decisions, including, potential show cause, placing ATC into administration while this review is ongoing. So that's also overshadowing it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite extraordinary. The whole thing's quite extraordinary. Like the last 2 years, next week is 2 years since we launched the straight. And the whole 2 years has been pretty much dominated by this story or some variation of this story, be it Rosehill, be it the extension. Like, literally 2 days after we launched, the Russell boarding stuff blew up, and it was, there was a late night parliamentary back down. We've also got this in a broader New South Wales political context, that we actually got a new opposition leader in New South Wales. So we don't know what that may lead as well. So there's a whole bunch of things up in the air. It's like, in terms of storylines. It's a gift that keeps on giving. But I think the people in racing, people in the New South Wales racing industry would like some certainty moving forward about what they may look like. And believe it or not, Tim, this is a federation, big country with lots of states, and there's lots going on in elsewhere as well. We've got a story on the straight today about WA's racing, and I think probably WA's probably flying under the radar a little bit in terms of how it's been performing, and Racing and Wagering WA is an interesting body because they have both the wagering aspect but also the PRA aspect of what they're doing. Warwick Barr had a good chat with Ian Edwards, the CEO there earlier this week, and I usually have a look at that. But it's sort of funny, I guess, probably they haven't received as much attention as they could have because they're not going backwards, they're not going forward, especially in the wagering space. They're sort of holding their own, but they see that as a win. And part of that is their media strategy and their engagement with a broader range of media in terms of their broadcast rights. So it's an interesting sort of contrast to what's going on. It's like, in WA. I mean, I know there have been some political issues in WA, which we spoke about with the trainers and stuff like that. And I think that obviously, in any industry where costs are going up, there's always going to be those conversations. And then we've got Tassie, which is where I'm from. But this week, a racing minister put out a pretty, sort of, to be perfectly honest, pretty bland press release saying we're making progress on the funding deed arrangements post 2029 for the two remaining codes. Greyhound Racing will obviously cease to exist within Tassie in a couple of years, but in 2029, the current funding deed expires. So they're working towards a solution. They've put together a steering committee to work that out. If I was someone within the racing industry trying to work out whether I should be investing more or not, it's probably not enough of a sign to me to say it's a sign of faith they're going to sort this out. But there still is, what are we, just over 3 years to sort that out. But if in the breeding industry, 3 years is only one breeding cycle, really, by the time you get a horse mare in foal, foal them down instead of the yearling markets. It's a 2.5 year process anyway. So interesting one. Racing Victoria had their AGM this week too, Tim. Just a quick update on that. There's a story up on the straight there talking about Aaron Morrison's challenges around Racing Victoria and where things sit at the moment. Obviously, we spoke about last week, I think, on this program about a deficit. May have happened after this program. They recorded an $8.8 million deficit, but Aaron Morrison is pointing to positive times and good results. But it's an interesting one, Tim, because we talked about, record wagering Melbourne Cup. How good was that? Well, the suggestions, and we'll get a bit more detail on this in the next couple of days, that, actually the notion that all the favourites won and the bookies actually had a bad time over the Melbourne Cup Carnival will leave Racing Victoria, or the Victorian racing industry, probably about $5 to $6 million out of pocket. So not all that record turnover figures necessarily needs to positive things. All right, the following segment is brought to you by Inglis. The catalogue for the 2026 Inglis Classic Yearling Sale has been released, with 798 lots set to go under the hammer at Riverside Stables in Sydney from February 8th to 10th. Yearlings by 113 sires make up the book, including leading stallions, Extreme Choice, Stencil, I'm Invincible, Sue Star, Too Darn Hot, Wooten Bassett, Written Tycoon, and Street Boss, as well as a deep roster of emerging names. 14 first season sires are represented, among them Animo, Artorias, Best of Bordeaux, Hitotsu, In the Congo, Jacquino, Profondo, and Top Ranked. 74 vendors represent yearlings, the vast majority eligible for state-based incentive schemes. The Classic Sale has produced 24 Group 1 winners since 2018, including the recent top-level performers Pride of Jenny, Sepples, Private Harry, and Skybird. Hong Kong Star Voyage Bubble is another star graduate. Check out inglis.com.au for the Inglis Classic Sale catalog. All right, Tim, on to wagering now. Off we go wagering towards the end of our discussions here. But I thought I'd elevate this one this week because there's a fair bit going on in the wagering space. And the first one is that Entain has announced that they've cut 60 jobs already, and they'll probably cut 60 jobs more in the next month or so. $60 million in annual savings. Look, probably not surprising that we're seeing this happen, given the transition that's going on in the Entain business and where things are at. I guess, Entain sort of put forward this notion that they pretty much cut from every aspect of the business, not including anti-money laundering and safer gambling teams, so that they're not touched, but the rest of them are. Given the expansion in marketing and the establishment of the racing clubs and all that sort of stuff, Tim, it's probably not surprising that the strategy sort of come back the other way, given the context of what we said in the last 12 months with the Austrac stuff as well.
No, it's they have Ladbrokes and Entain in New Zealand, obviously with their 25-year tote deal or wagering deal over there in New Zealand and Australia. You just can't miss their presence. They went under Dean Shannon and Lachlan Fitt and so forth, invested a lot of money in content and putting the brand out there to grow the business. But now that Andrew Voris is in charge, and I guess it's probably not dissimilar to Gil McLaughlin at Tabcorp, come in. I don't know what their KPIs are exactly, but there would be bonuses attached to, profit, different things like that. And they come in and cut costs, and the balance sheet looks a lot better. And that's what he's clearly trying to achieve at the moment. And, what the effects of that are, obviously we know some of these staff, hopefully most of them keep their jobs, but the contraction is probably not surprising given the market's plateaued a little bit, and just the amount of money Entain has spent or invested over the last few years in the context of AusTrack, as you say.
Yeah, and we've been reporting for the last 12 months about their quarterly results, which come out of the UK. And the Australian market is, one of the aspects which is not as travelling as well as other. Now, there's some specific issues within Entain to deal with within that. So, and obviously this flies on to New Zealand as well, and the deal in New Zealand, which is obviously, a 25-year deal, significant from their perspective. So there's specific issues with Entain. Obviously, the AusTrack action has sort of put a halt on that expansive strategy and changed things, and we might probably see a resolution for that until well into 2026. But there's the broader issues as well to look at, it's PointsBet are having issues around revenue, and they're the biggest player in the market. Tab are trying to turn things around as well. So the broader market would indicate that the expansion that took place, in those postcode things, probably haven't seen those sort of cutbacks as yet. We've seen some now, probably within PointsBet, less publicly, certainly within Tabcorp sort of 12 months ago. We're about 10% of the workforce of Entain this will represent. So it's an issue one from that perspective. And then against the contrast of that, we've got PointsBet, who have now got their chief investor, majority investor, and Mixie very much in the building now. They've got 3 people on the board. They're working together. Japanese-based company with a lot of heft and wealth behind them. They want to really drive PointsBet into this social betting space. Now, that's a space that has been sort of, I guess in Australia, sort of pioneered and developed by Dabble primarily, Tim. Are we the wrong generation for this social betting trend? Or maybe we are to be talking about this, but they obviously see opportunities in that market, and they've obviously made great progress within Japan in order of what they've been able to develop with their Tipstar product over there, Pixie. But it'd be interesting to see how they go, because PointsBet have been very clever at sort of negotiating their way through, becoming probably more sports focused than some of the other bookmakers, and under Sam Swinell's leadership have sort of focused on growing the market in Australia that way. This will be a significant step, so I'd be interested to see how this one plays out.
Well, I guess I've had to admit I was wrong or be converted, and I'm just taking the evidence from the back in the punt conference we attended in September from listening to the guys at Dabble, how much the social betting and the amount of turnover from people copying other people's bets. So I guess that's where it's at with social media and younger generations copying their mates or their favourite tipsters and things like that to have a bet rather than doing their own form. Hopefully that, as they get older and more mature, and they enjoy that facet of doing their own form or sports teams or whatever they're betting on. So, but I guess to attract new customers, I think that's probably the best way of doing it, supposedly at the moment, given the way the market is at the moment.
Yeah, and speaking of generational shifts, there was an article we published on the Straight yesterday about the size of the illegal betting market within Australia. Responsible Wagering Australia, which represent the bookies. So just put a little asterisk on that, because they're the ones got a vested interest in making sure money doesn't go offshore. But they've done or commissioned a third-party outfit to do a significant study into the size of the illegal online betting market in Australia. $3.9 billion a year being spent across that. $135 million a year out of the racing's pocket in terms of fees and race field fees and pot stuff and whatever else that would flow back to the industry. I said we talk about people betting and generationally betting in a different context. What was interesting in some of the stats there is 44% of people didn't know the difference between an illegal site and a legal site. They didn't know that if you're betting an overseas on one of these overseas operators, that actually wasn't legal within Australia. I think obviously there's been a generational shift which has allowed this, but also the tighter regulation in Australia has probably pushed a few more people offshore, and that's what this report showed. But are you surprised by how big it is? Given that this is a true representation, does that surprise you, Tim, or do you feel like it's something that's always going to be a part? And just to give some context, 1 in every 7 bets on Australian racing, according to this report, is happening on an overseas unregulated operator.
Well, we've got to take it again in the context of how have they come up with this information? It wouldn't be easy to get accurate information, I wouldn't have thought, but I guess there's
The
options
4,000
out there.
person survey, that's what part of it. Key
Yeah.
part of the 4,000 people that they surveyed.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that's the methodology that they've sort of put
Yeah,
forward. So.
but how much people are willing to divulge. But obviously we've spoken about stake and different the cryptocurrency betting, casinos. I guess I'm not totally surprised just with contacts I've got with, say, CityBet, which I'm not suggesting a lot of illegal money goes through there, just from Australia, but there's huge turnover on a lot of Australian racing. Particularly if you look at the Super Tab dividends at the smaller meetings, perhaps like on a Sky 2 or just a midweek meetings away from Flemington or Randwick, there's some wild fluctuations, and that just can be the small pools, but also I think it's to do with CityBet and people laying off or backing other runners, horses that, there's big betting on one and certain particular horses, and that's driving your, illegal economy. And I'm sure there's some semi-professionals using CityBet or manipulating the totes and things like that. And that's possibly a little bit separate to this report with the, cryptocurrencies or however they're betting on different forms of racing and accounts.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think there's probably two aspects of it. There is the sort of crypto gaming, online casino sort of market, which is probably one part. And to be honest, it's actually, it has always been relatively easy to access these things, whether it be through VPN or whatever else. I'm not going to tell people how to do it, but even a Gen Xer like me can work those things out relatively straightforward. But what I'll be fascinated, I'm going to reach out to a few of the PRAs in the next couple of weeks and talk to them about how are they trying to address this issue, how are they trying to make sure that people can't do that. And from an integrity point of view, we just don't know. We just don't know where these bets are going. We don't have visibility on them. It's a massive issue across the board, across global racing. Illegal betting's always been, from the SP days, Jim, all the way through. But, the reality is some of the key stats within it was 50% of the people who said they were betting online said they were also registered with bloodstock, which means that they're not allowed to bet on other products. So are the people that are being blocked from betting, which is fine, excluding themselves here, who may have betting issues, going to these other providers. And we don't get a clear view on them, and they don't get consumer protections and all that sort of stuff. I guess and pushing back what RWA want, which I understand why they want it. They want better understanding from governments and people are making decisions that if you block off an area here in terms of legalised betting, you're going to force more people in the overseas market. Now, there's always been a bit of a suggestion in some broader media places and certainly those on the other side of the gambling debate that, oh, no, that's just furphy and a myth. It's not. Whether you think it's $3.9 billion, which this number comes out as, or, $1.6 billion, which ACRA said it was earlier this year, it's $1 billion industry. It's a serious industry, and it's one that needs to be looked at in any form of gambling legislation and harm minimisation and all these words that we use. We need to be able to look at this. And if, if $135 million is escaping out of the racing industry in Australia, that's a lot of money. When you're talking about, Racing Victoria losing $8 million, well, if you're talking about other businesses copying, other PRAs having to sort of cut their cloth, it is significant. So I don't know. It needs to be addressed in some way or form. There are 11 recommendations in the report. I urge you to read it. Again, it is coming from a bookie's perspective, the RWA's perspective. So do take that as context. But it is a significant study and the best study we've had so far around this stuff. The following segment is brought to you by Darley. It's been another big spring for the Darley Stallions, with their progeny delivering right across the carnival. In total, 38 stakes races were won, everything from those sharp early 2-year-olds through to the major Group 1s. And while the Godolphin racing team certainly played their part, it was the Clyde-bred horses who really filled the sheet. They counted for 26 of those 38 stakes wins. 4 Darley Stallions produced Group 1 winners this spring, spanning the whole range from the 1,200 metres to 2,500 metres. Street Boss, Too Darn Hot, Harry Angel and Gayath all had multiple stakes winners across the carnival. Too Darn Hot's pre-Christmas 2-year-olds were flying again, taking both the Jim Crack and the Darley Maribyrnong plate. And Bivouac notched his first Group 1 winner, Baywalked, who broke the track record at the Golden Rose with a rating of 108. Bred well, buy well, win well. Darley. Tim, finally I'm due a breeding, and obviously we usually have this a little bit higher up on the agenda, but probably this time of year things get a bit quiet off the back of the 2-year-old sales completing. There's a plenty of analysis around those 2-year-old sales, and obviously you were at Cracker last week, as we mentioned, and one of the people you caught up with was Shane Dye, the former star jockey, one of the rock stars of Australian racing in the sort of 90s and 2000s. Yeah, and it's interesting to see where sort of Shane's career is taking him. You've obviously seen him in the media and he's obviously doing a fair bit of betting and whatever else, but bloodstock's also a passion of his as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. Always interested to talk to Shane. He's never shy of an opinion, and had a great chat and quite extended talk with Shane. Yes, he's sort of dipping his toe into the bloodstock space, but what's interesting is he knows his limitations. He thinks his edge is in evaluating 2-year-olds and their actions and things like that. Most other people or bloodstock agents would go, well, he's got some wealthy clients behind him. Let's go to the yearling sales or weanling sales, buy mares, do all sorts of things. Just sticking to the 2-year-olds because that's his edge in evaluating them. He rode 4 Golden Slipper winners, so he said he's always had an eye for a young horse and how they, perhaps what sets them apart, and it's about their action. He didn't quite explain that exactly what it is, what he's looking for, but you can see with their attitude, he said, and how they hold their head and different things like that. And I presume stride length. And so they went and bought 4 2-year-olds last year at Karaka, and the 3 of them, 2 went to Hong Kong, and one, a shocking horse, something arrogant. I've just forgotten his name, but he's
shocking was a stallion, not the description of the horse, by the way.
Yeah, that is now with Lindsay Park. They sold to My Racehorse, presumably very privately off a trial win at Avondale for presumably a lot of money because they paid $320,000 for him as a yearling. So as a 2-year-old, sorry. So I'm sure there's a healthy profit in there for them, and they rebought 4 this year, and they go to Glenold at Matamata to further their education and trial up, and then hopefully sell them to either Australia or Hong Kong. So it's an interesting sort of adjunct to Shane's career on top of doing Hong Kong form and punting and a bit of media and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, it actually proved a very popular story in the site this week. I was looking at the numbers there. It was one of our more popular stories of the week. Another story which proved, resonated very strongly was your tribute you penned to the great John Jess. JJ left us this week. He passed away this week. I know, Tim, you had a fair bit to do with him over the journey. He was a great supporter of the straight. He really was. He was, when we started out, he reached out. And he was always there commenting on our articles on Facebook and whatever else. But more so beyond that, he was someone who had a wealth, a lifetime of knowledge of the racing industry, all the way from his work with the STC, and the track stuff to Hong Kong, to all the stuff he did at the sales. He was a man that knew everybody on the sales ground, made sure everybody felt welcome and understood, but also knew more. Yeah, had you forgotten more than you and I will learn in our lifetime, too.
Yeah, just fortunate. I guess it probably wasn't a surprise what happened, but it still came as a shock to everyone, and certainly myself. And very sad, sort of cut me up a little bit on Tuesday, but he's a very popular man. He was very good to a lot of people in sort of his knowledge. He was a great storyteller, had a lot of fun as well, but from a vendors where I got to know him through the sales, a lot of farms wanted to use his services because he was trustworthy, hardworking, he knew everyone, and as Mick Malone told me that quite often other farms that come across to run across to JJ and go, who's that person? Can you help us out? They've just filled out a card. Who are they? And he was always generous with his time. And as Mick again said, sometimes maybe he was hard on the staff, but he made them work and they respected him for it. And so we farewell JJ, and he'll be farewell to Rosehill Racecourse in early December, and I'm sure there'll be a big turnout and a drink ad for sure.
Yeah, and so people like that in this industry need to be valued and remembered. And I think it's important that we acknowledge those people and the impact that they make. I just finally wanted to sort of finish off on we had both the Inglis Classic catalogue, which we alluded to earlier in our live read, but also the NZB Yearling Sale Karaka catalogues announced this week. We've now got sort of the 3 main early ones all out now. Yeah, I mean, it changes pretty quickly, this bloodstock world, doesn't it? We're suddenly moving to 2026 focus pretty quickly, looking at the best horses that might come through next year. And the expectations around that, it certainly whets the appetite for what's going to come forward in the next few months.
Yeah, definitely. Classic, as you know, Magic's has already been released, and Classic about sort of same numbers as normal, and there's always multiple good horses that come out of that sale. And NZB, it's their 100th year, as we've discussed before. A lot of the New Zealand vendors, of course, I always back the home country sale, but with even more numbers next year, and given on the back of a strong ready to run sale, I'm sure there'll be the traders will be there buying, and a lot of sort of Australians and the local domestic market as well. So I think there's a little bit of optimism heading into the sales in 2026.
Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk, brought to you by our sponsors, Inglis and NZB. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to our podcast. Be sure to subscribe. Don't forget to also become a member of the Straight to get access to all our articles. Send us an email at editor@straight.com.au and let us know what you want us to talk about. Thanks for your time, and we'll talk to you again next week.